Hello, denizens of the night, and welcome back to the quote-unquote ultimate World of Darkness Iceberg. I am Ignacio Vitalis, and now we're in deep waters, with more obscure publishings, fan-made contributions, and rare turtles. Since you're watching the second part of the World of Darkness Iceberg, I won't bother explaining the World of Darkness again, so we can get right back into the trivia. The idea that vicissitude is a disease was introduced in the Vampire the Masquerade 1st edition sourcebook, Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand. Early in their history, some members of the True Black Hand, or Tal Mehera, which is the name I'll be using from here on out, teamed up with the mages of the Sanatoid to enter the Deep Umbra. While there, one of the Tzimisce vampires in the group, Andelion, bit into a spirit called a Soul Eater, which was likely some kind of bane, that transmitted a spiritual plague into him. Andelion would then become the first practitioner of vicissitude, which the rest of the Tal Mehera thought was weird as shit and probably dangerous, as other Tzimisce began to suddenly manifest the discipline. So, Andelion was executed while the Tal Mehera forbade any future excursions into the Deep Umbra. Through its plague form that has spread amongst Clan Tzimisce, the Soul Eaters themselves gradually wear away at their hosts until supplanting them completely, taking the form of some disgusting flesh monstrosity. The Tal Mehera has been hunting down these little shits, and while they put some magic into the bot to stem the transmission of the disease, they haven't been doing the best job at it. This is why the old Clan Tzimisce, also introduced in Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, don't have vicissitude, as they bailed when they realized what was happening with the rest of their clan. This whole idea wasn't really received too well, and beyond the Soul Eaters, feelings towards the Tal Mehera were also mixed. Between the over-the-top story for a single discipline dragging in ideas irrelevant to vampires such as the Deep Umbra, and the idea that the Tzimisce Antediluvian didn't know vicissitude, once Revised Edition came around and the Tal Mehera exploded, along with the Shadowlands as detailed in the Ends of Empire book, something had to change, while still applying the not shit idea of vicissitude being some kind of degenerative disease. In Revised Edition's Guide to the Sabbat, there is a section for depicting vicissitude as a disease without the backstory for it coming to be as such. In 20th Anniversary Vampire the Masquerade, the V20 companion presents the Tal Mehera's battle with the Soul Eaters without their role in the creation of vicissitude, and the Black Hand Guide to the Tal Mehera tells a rewritten version of Andelion's contact with something very related to vicissitude. Instead of the Deep Umbra, Andelion was in the labyrinths of the underworld, as removing their mage angle is easier than removing the wraith angle from the Tal Mehera. Here, he communes with something the Tal Mehera has called the Asaku, and becomes patient zero for its influence while also gaining vicissitude. While the discipline isn't inextricably tied to the Asaku's influence, this force, spread through the blood of one already corrupted by it, is tied to mastery of the discipline. This whole plot is more explicitly framed as an optional, or half-truth, swayed by the fears held by the Tal Mehera. Seriously, what are you artsy twats doing to this game? What happened to the black shiny clothes, the incessant machine gun firing, the super speed battles atop subway trains? Where are the hot chicks, thrusting their boobs out along with their lower lips, taunting and teasing you into ultimate sin? The angst was just supposed to be an excuse for the hot goth fashions. We all reveled in the power and the violence, the sex without consequences, and a life immortal where little humans dance to our tunes. Put all the other books away, boys and girls. This is all you really need. Discover what it really means to be a right and proper bloodsucker. Prior to reading the Changing Breeds book for Chronicles of Darkness, I would say either Beast of Primordial's core rulebook or Dudes of Legend was the worst Chronicles of Darkness book I've read, by being unfunny, not helped by it being written by my parasocial arch-nemesis Chuck Wendig. Published in 2010, Dudes of Legend is a sourcebook for Chronicles for over-the-top role-playing and parody chronicles. It's a joke sourcebook, as the book confesses in its first chapter, but it's difficult to get through the book without at least rolling my eyes here and there. Over its 19 pages, it provides a list of what it calls hacks, which are kind of like merits, but ridiculous, like the trench coat of hotness and holding, homoeroticism equals Seeger's power, and just playing as Mary Sue. Its words, not mine. This book is rooted in a style of play that's mostly stuck in the past now called Vampian, a portmanteau of vampire and champion in reference to Vampire the Masquerade and the old Champions TTRPG. The Vampian style was all about playing gothic superheroes in the world of darkness as defined by the culture of the time, which was the mid to late 90s. Dudes of Legend sort of harkens to that time, the style of play, and 2000's angst, which might have come around a bit too late. I will say that at least 20% of the jokes land, which means that it somewhat fulfills its intention, whereas the other books I mentioned, Beast the Primordial and Changing Breeds, have a shitty direction. Princess the Hopeful, the fan splat for the Chronicle of Darkness based on magical girls, stuff like Sailor Moon and Madoka Magica, but more of the latter than the former. Out of all the fan splats I've seen, this is probably the second most expansive, with a 433-page PDF available on the dedicated website, along with several supplements by the creators and fans of Princess the Hopeful. The princesses, which need not be female, are the mostly reincarnated and occasionally chosen servants of a force called Light, created from love and friendship, and they oppose its opposite called the Darkness, created from despair and the actions that perpetuate it. If that sounds typical, that's the point. And the princesses are raised in very dogmatic cultures known as courts, essentially the covenant or tribe for princesses. Idealism conflicting with reality is a crucial theme in this game, and during character creation, princesses also take a calling, which acts as both their clan or auspice, and as a code for their ideals. Acting outside of their calling or against it has mechanical consequences, as integrity is modified as belief, and compromising on their ideals can threaten belief if they can't justify it to themselves, not to mention that negative confrontations can also threaten belief. Another theme is the price of selflessness, as for an example here, the dice pool to see whether a princess's belief gets damaged after a compromise is reduced by 1 if the compromise came from acting upon a vice, as they swore to put their responsibilities before themselves when becoming a princess. A few other interesting things that I found are that this game has a ton of similarities to Changeling the Dreaming, the two most obvious being that the moon landing caused several princesses to blossom from the sheer amount of hope flaring up across the globe, though alternate periods when this happened are also presented in this book. And the courts have a bit of the unseelie and seelie schism going on. For another parallel, the nobility the princesses are a part of is also based in a realm called the Dreamlands. The game is also primarily set in a world with a significantly thinner veil, as entire cities get their shit rocked by literal monsters, and the existence of princesses is just kind of accepted, even if their true identities remain anonymous. This is just adherence to genre conventions, and chronicles with a veil no thicker than usual, as described in the official books, don't inherently conflict with Princess the Hopeful. King Breweries and Distilleries is a Pentech subsidiary, and amongst the first introduced in the first edition of Sourcebook for Werewolf the Apocalypse, the Book of the Worm. Initially presented as just selling worm-tainted alcohol to youth to turn them into early alcoholics, King has been fleshed out as a company jumping headfirst into Pentech's agenda, with a number of its own subsidiaries all working towards the same goal, whether it's through vodka, seltzers, or covering for themselves through a water safety foundation. For most products, the corruption manifests as consumers becoming binge-drinking slobs, while a few items have unique rules, such as the aforementioned seltzers agitating bane spread through other products, or the vodka being untainted for now, but discreetly sold in place of other brands, so once an agenda is put forward, several other brands become implicated in it. If playing as magical Romani people doesn't quite fit your chronicle, the World of Darkness Mafia book, published in 2002, presents the option of playing as the classic Sicilian mafiosos, along with their views on the supernatural. With the particular type of heightened reality the classic World of Darkness is set in, organized crime remains in its pre-Rico heyday, less The Sopranos and more Goodfellas, so to speak. The book is also meant to work with vampire, werewolf, mage, and wraith, in that order of descending relevancy. It's also written from the perspective of someone in the mob, so that's kind of the presentation that leads to the Yakuza and Triads being referred to as quote-unquote slants. Some of these ideas were reframed in Hunter's Hunted 2 for 20th Anniversary World of Darkness, as having a background in an organized crime syndicate is provided as an option for Hunter characters. Anastagio's Old-Time Lunar Carnival and Midnight Circus, or just the Midnight Circus as I will call it, is a circus in the classic world of darkness introduced in the Midnight Circus sourcebook published in 1996. It is the second sourcebook to support crossover games following Chaos Factor, specifically with Vampire, Werewolf, Mage, Wraith, and Changeling, as the Midnight Circus plays with overlapping cosmologies. The circus is controlled by an Afandi, Unseelie Sidhi, and an Elder Vampire with very supernaturals beneath them, such as rogue shapechangers, Fomori, and specters. Its history saw it cross paths with an incarnate spirit and Apophis itself, which saw to its corruption and descent to what it is now. While it is packed with various unnatural attractions, order is maintained with a glamour veil, so mortal visitors think nothing of the oddities ranging from violence between the talents to an exhibit of Fomori. Interacting with the attractions can grant characters snares, which can be spent on various items such as a pair of glasses that can pierce the shroud. However, characters may also accrue barbs, which corrupt them to the circus's influence. This book is about as chaotic as it sounds, but remains par for the course with the rest of the 90s World of Darkness in mind. While psychics do fall under the category of reality deviants, as per the Guide to the Technocracy, the progenitors have been experimenting on them to see if there's anything of use, focusing on their subtler abilities such as clairvoyance. In Technocracy Reloaded for 20th Anniversary Mage, the black suits of the New World Order are very explicitly described as powerful psychics, and while talking about them, there is mention of less powerful psychics working with the NWO. This doesn't severely contradict the mention of psychics in the Guide to the Technocracy, as the NWO is perhaps the most subtle of the Technocracy conventions and would likely make use of psychic extraordinary citizens who wield appropriately subtle powers. I gotta say, I just let out a very long sigh before starting recording this one. In recent years, there is some discussion about where the Get of Fenris stands in an era where appropriation of Norse paganism and the Viking aesthetic by fascists becomes increasingly interpreted as Norse paganism and the Viking aesthetic are inseparable from fascism. Is it something we reclaim or leave behind? Whether you do or don't have to squint to see the tribe symbol bears a more than passing resemblance to a swastika, the writers behind the tribe are aware of this analysis, and in the Get of Fenris tribe book, we get a peek into a sect known as the Swords of Heimdall. This faction popped up during World War II from Get who saw parallels between their own history and the Nazi myths of the Übermensch and ended up supporting the Third Reich. The conflict between them and the rest of the tribe supposedly ended in the swords being completely eradicated, though this isn't certain. By 20th Anniversary Edition, the discrimination remains a problem within the Get of Fenris. Jumping to a completely different timeline, a month prior to the release of 5th edition World of the Apocalypse's core rulebook, J.F. Zambrano, who previously worked on the new book during its time being developed by Hunter Entertainment, made a Patreon post talking about his experiences working on it, while highlighting several incidents regarding anti-indigeneity. I genuinely really want to talk about this, but not in this video as I want to focus on the Get of Fenris, and Zambrano talks about how they became the Cult of Fenris in 5th edition. Hunter's Entertainment were given a list of goals and ideas by Paradox, which included removing the Get of Fenris to replace them with the Sword of Heimdall as an entire tribe of Nazis. The thematic purpose is identical to what we got in the final book, a tribe that has fallen completely to Howell. However, the team at Hunter's Entertainment came to the conclusion that if they turned a well-liked tribe into Nazis, players who loved the tribe in previous iterations would either be pissed or work around it so they can play as what the writers designated as the Nazi tribe. This was among the key issues that resulted in Hunter's Entertainment being removed from the project in favor of writing it in-house, like everything else post-White Wolf disbandment. By the time the core book actually came out, the Cult of Fenris became defined by the recklessness and paranoia, rather than explicitly far-right ideologies. Additionally, in the Shattered Nation sourcebook, there is a hint that the Cult of Fenris belonged to a larger tribe before their ideology consumed the whole thing, while groups from other tribes were open to joining their ranks. As for their history, one day at a grand gathering of tribes when the Garou nation was still around, the cult called for all the tribes to charge headfirst into the Worm's domain in order to destroy it and avert the apocalypse. The hesitation from the other tribes gave way to conflict, and this fight ended with the cult proclaiming a permanent separation from all the other tribes. The hints of real far-right ideologies linger still in depictions of the Cult of Fenris, such as an example character, the Berserker Arun, being described as, quote, Festooned with a variety of abhorrent symbols, the Berserker rune wears their hate overtly and charges into the fray, hoping to leave behind as much injury as possible on lesser individuals, whether Garou or Worm Thralls. There is also the character Henrik from Werewolf the Apocalypse: The Book of Hungry Names, who is a eugenicist, and I'm sure other depictions of far-right ideologies among the Garou will be presented through the cult of Fenris in the future. Beyond the 13 main vampire clans, which, to bounce off 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, include the Banu Hakim, previously the Assamites, Bruja, General Hakata, previously Giovanni, Lasombra, Malkavian, the Ministry, previously the Followers of Set, Nosferatu, Ravnos, Toreador, Tremere, Zenitsi, and Ventru, there are a few clans which were either supplanted by one of the 13, exist parallel to them, or are simply beyond our explanation. I'll talk about a few while staying away from bloodlines that have mostly clear origins, unless they're relevant to the clan. Firstly, there's the Cappadocians, which were the Giovanni before the Augustus Giovanni himself diablerized to Antediluvian to form the Giovanni clan, and they're mostly relevant to the Dark Ages setting. Their disciplines were Auspex, Fortitude, and Necromancy, with their clan bane being that they all look like horses. Not rotten ones, but definitely not lively. Their thing was about necromancy, of course, but without the mafia angle that Giovanni has. The survivors still kick around through the Harbingers of Skulls, a bloodline that was melted into the goddess soup under the name the Harbingers of Ashur. In the Gehenna War sourcebook, it's revealed that, unsurprisingly, not all the Cappadocians are happy about joining the bloodline that killed their actual ancestor, and a faction called Mora's Deathseers actively hunts the Giovanni members of the Hecata. Then there's the Salubri, who were in a similar position to the Cappadocians, but with the Tremere fucking them over and diablerizing their antediluvian instead. Their disciplines are Auspex, Fortitude, and something else depending on the edition. The Bane varies as well, initially being that they couldn't shrink from unwilling mortals, and in 5th edition, their blood is extremely delicious. They also have a third eyeball, which raises way too many questions for the Masquerade, and their whole thing is about being healers and noble warriors, which is obviously why the fuck-ass Tremere hunt them down. Next up, we've got the Bali, a clan of Infernalists that no one likes because they're fucking Infernalists. No one knows the Antediluvian, but there are 3 different Methuselahs that have propagated this clan. Their disciplines are Obfuscate, Presence, and Daemonian. That last discipline draws upon the powers of hell to send sin, to set targets ablaze, or plant curses. Their bane is that they're repelled by symbols of faith, even when true faith isn't in the picture, while true faith is significantly more dangerous to them. They were more relevant during the Dark Ages, but they've popped up here and there in the modern nights. Their presence in 5th edition has been shaky, with a plan to feature them in the Cults of the Blood God sourcebook getting struck down by Paradox, and they later appeared in the Tattered Facade sourcebook as something so completely different that they become no longer relevant to this topic. Kindred of the Ebony Kingdom, which was published in 2003 and is still way too late to give a book that name, introduced the Legacies, which are similar to the 13 clans, with distinct differences in culture due to their disconnect from the main 3 sects, but are also different in their disciplines and banes. The followers of Set, with their history rooted in the African territory of Egypt, are relevant but not meaningfully different. The Guruhi, on the other hand, descend from Assimilated, with the disciplines of Animalism and Potence, but they take precedence in place of Obfuscate, and their bane is that their appearance changes based on their mood. They can look just fine while in a good mood, while looking like Count Orlok during a frenzy. 20th Anniversary Dark Ages introduced 3 additional legacies, such as the Bauxman, territorial hunters that could be of the Gangrel or Nosferatu clans. Lastly, there's the Drowned Legacies, which were introduced in Beckett's Jaha Diary, and have actually reappeared in the Cults of the Blood Gods, and even 5th edition Hunt of the Reckoning. There's actually some debate and doubt as to whether or not they are kindred, or if this is a case of extreme divergency, as they were developing on the other side of the planet, while common vampire history was being told in Europe. Some have niche powers, such as the inherent complete immunity to fire of the... Oh shit, I really should have thought about how to pronounce this. Some have niche powers, such as the inherent complete immunity to fire of the Twahelpuchi, or the ability to mimic people they feed on of the Lostundo. Very few of these give us even a hint of who their progenitor could be, and most kindred who know about them are simply just freaked out by them. Vampires Masquerade Bloodlines is a cult classic, but at the time it was a commercial failure, which meant that it would be a long while before any sequel would get serious consideration. Discussion was sparked during Paradox's acquisition of White Wolf in 2015, and the news would break in 2019 that Paradox would be working with Hardsuit Labs, a game studio that mostly worked alongside other studios, to create a sequel to Bloodlines. This was actually in the works since 2015, and after 5 years of development and a delay announced in 2020, Paradox removed several key developers and in 2021 dismissed Hardsuit from the project. Nobody heard anything in 2022, and in 2023, it was announced that the Chinese room had taken over the project not long after Hardsuit Lab was taken off of it. The Chinese room was an odd fit. Their prior games have been well received, including Dear Esther, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, and Still Wakes the Deep. But this is a mix of horror games and story-focused exploration games. No release date was given for the longest time, but in 2024, it was announced that the game would come out in early 2025. That got pushed in October of 2024, with the studio stating that they were doing finishing touches for technical issues, and the opening night live preview show for video games featured Bloodlines 2 with a final release date of October 21st. All while this was happening, some previews were put out that didn't inspire much confidence, but after so much time, I kinda struggled to care as much as some people have. Don't even get me started on the DLC cleansing, which was resolved pretty well, all things considered. By the time this video is finished, the game will be out, and I'll pass this off to Editing Iggy. He refused to buy the game at full price, and I get that, so he's just gonna put that Hellboy Rotten Tomatoes thing, but with the game score. Now, let's see what we got. The topic is titled 2 Arcadias, but we actually have 4 Arcadias, and I'll rattle about them in ascending relevancy, though they all have something to do with fairies. Ars Magica had a fairy realm called Arcadia, and Mage the Awakening features the supernal realm of Arcadia, which is tied to the arcana of time and fate. It's an enchanted realm inhabited by woodland creatures of legend, including fairies alongside nymphs and dryads. While also in the Chronicles of Darkness, the Arcadia in Changeling of the Lost is not the same one in Mage the Awakening. In Changeling of the Lost, it is the realm of the true fae found beyond the hedge, and it is as majestic, bizarre, and terrifying as the true fae themselves. It is also where Changeling players must have all escaped from, or will if that's where you start your chronicle, and it can be revisited for one reason or another with several defined locations. Lastly, Arcadia in Changeling the Dreaming is the realm that all Fae came from, and that had to be isolated from the rest of the world after the Sundering brought too much banality to keep it safe. Many Fae stayed in Arcadia, while some opted to stay in the Autumn world and become changelings, with the cycle of reincarnation keeping the memory of Arcadia alive. While many desire to return, no one is allowed inside. However, there are many rumors that Arcadia is in some state of disarray, after the whole moon landing resurgence thing, and later the Evanescence. The resurgence specifically brought many of the Fae out from Arcadia to become changelings, which presumes a reason to want to leave. Genius the Transgression is a fan splat for 1st edition Chronicles of Darkness, based around mad scientists. This one is a little bigger than Princess with a 488-page PDF that can be found easily online. In this game, players will struggle as their genius is torn between discontent and ambition, while finding inspiration that paves the way for extraordinary creations, which are made in service to their obligation. Should that obligation fall away, the genius loses their parameters to become a completely deranged mad scientist, which players will likely have to deal with. Geniuses are split between their motivations and the organization they align with, which, in game terms, are their catalyst and foundation respectively, equivalent to clan and sect or auspice and tribe. Their powers come from mania, and that's kind of exactly what it sounds like, because the geniuses can't realize their inspiration through regular old science. This can be refined through specific axioms, which is how you start getting into making killer robots, mutagenic serums, teleporters, and gizmos. The foundations determine the axioms, and these groups are unified by the peerage, which is likely how the player characters will find themselves in a group. In a typical chronicle of genius transgression, one might expect regular infighting within the peerage, along with a war between them and the Lemurians, which is kind of like if all the marauders with scientific paradigms and mage ascension banded together. It's all distinctly bonkers, but you're kind of getting exactly what's sold to you with the book's cover. There is something a little exhausting about getting into things that have nothing to do with the world of darkness. This isn't the White Wolf Iceberg, so I'll make this quick. And I know that sounds dismissive. I'm sorry to all the Trinity fans out there. I'll say the assassin setting looks pretty cool. Trinity Continuum is a series of action TTRPGs initially published by White Wolf in 1997 with the science fiction Aeon setting. The settings that followed, of which there are 6 including Aeon, would take place in different time periods ranging from ancient Greece to the 22nd century. All are oriented around superpowered and exceptional individuals, whether they are psychics or divine champions. It looks really cool, but I want to keep things focused, so let's talk about something that requires urgent attention. I really don't know if this is a retread of the epic battle between Sasha Vikos and Hardstrat, or if this is in reference to one of the many pieces of kindred slang that White Wolf introduced in Vampire the Masquerade source books. Believe me when I say, I'm not spiritually capable of digging through the entire Vampire the Masquerade lexicon to find the specific insult that kindred use that concerns the penis. I'm sorry. I understand if you want to dislike the video, but let's move on. The Masquerade of the Red Death is a trilogy of novels for Vampire the Masquerade, written by Robert Weinberg from 1995 to 1996, following a Euthanatoid detective who gets caught up in the masquerade during a period of upheaval brought by a recently awakened Bali Methuselah. These books tied into a trilogy of Meiji Ascension novels that were non-canon, and that retroactively made these non-canon as well. Revealed by the Avatar Storm and discovered by the Void Engineers Convention, Thread Null is a dark mirror to the technocracy, dwelling beyond the far horizon that calls itself the Technocratic Union. It is believed that they were created after the Archmages of the technocracy dwelling in the distant Horizon realms were caught up in the Avatar Storm and were twisted into extreme versions of themselves. Their existence has been kept secret by the Void Engineers, and while dealing with their corrupting influence on the technocracy, they have encountered the alternate versions of the other conventions. The Autopolitans are Iteration X, the Transhumanists are the Progenitors, the Agency is the NWO, and the Residents are the Syndicate. So what's the evil version of the Void Engineers? Who knows, really? Convention book Void Engineers for Revised Edition presents the possibility that the Masters of the Void Engineers found a way to avoid the corruption of the Avatar Storm. The Technocracy Reloaded sourcebook for 20th Anniversary Edition Mage also presents the possibilities that the Void Engineers, even if they were taken to the extreme, would remain benevolent, or at least unconcerned with spreading its influence. Perhaps they're fighting extra-dimensional entities in depths that not even the Void Engineers could hope to reach, which would make finding them ill-advised. The term usurpation refers to a key event in Exalted and an unrelated event in the history of Clan Tremere. In Exalted, the usurpation is when the terrestrial Exalted overthrew the solar Exalted. In Clan Tremere history, the ritual of usurpation is what turned the heads of House Tremere into vampires. That wasn't exactly the intention, they just wanted the immortality, but they also got their avatars destroyed in the process and they lost their true magic. The ritual was masterminded by the Archmage Goratrix, who had been experimenting on the local Tzimisce vampires and his apprentices while making pacts with powerful beings to realize the ritual. He invited 7 or 8 Archmages, the number depending on the book you read, and again it proved fruitless as they became vampires. Despite this event making usurper a common pejorative for Tremere vampires, This is not to be confused with the diablerie of Saulot, which happened over a century later and somewhat legitimized these vampires as a clan. In Changeling the Lost, the clan and covenant equivalents are seeming and court, but players may also pick a kiss for their characters. Keeping up the comparison, it can be seen as the equivalent of a bloodline. However, while not all bloodlines have a unique discipline, all kiss have a unique blessing power. It is recommended to take a kiss, but not necessary, and changelings may also lose their kiss. I can't dive into all of them for the sake of focus, but to get a gist, there are 16 Beast Kiss, 15 Darkling Kiss, 14 Elemental Kiss, 17 Fairest Kiss, 13 Ogre Kiss, and 17 Wizened Kiss. And if you can't tell by my voice, I'm kind of struggling to pronounce kiss, but I hope you got all that. In Changeling the Dreaming, the Harbingers of Exodus are an apostate group descending from the angst-ridden House Bauxman, and to explain the heretics, I have to recap a bit of House Bauxman history. The Duke Jeremin once encountered a lost lover in some strange deep reach of the Dreaming, and she claimed that the Bane of Cold Iron would be the key to achieving a pure state of being as a true Fae. Jeremin told this to one of his brothers, Markesh, and he said, "I checked my prophetic nightmare visions and that sounds about right," and took Jeremin's legend of the Iron Road as gospel. This legend passed down to the Harbingers of Exodus, now led by a Lord Vandermeer, who seek the Iron Road, and while they are looked down upon by most of the Cason, they carry a fearsome reputation as well. Not helping as that despite the Seelie house they originate from, they have unseelie Cason within the ranks. Ultimately though, while zealous and angsty, the latter element being unexceptional for those of House Bauxman, they don't revel in any evils. Sticking to the Changeling the Dreaming beat one last time, the Beltane Blade is a secret society introduced in the Nobles the Shining Host sourcebook. It is made up of Sidhe nobles dedicated to maintaining the power of their fellow nobles, even if it goes against a monarchy. It's a kind of nobles union, I guess, but it only allows membership from the Sidhe, though they command changelings of other kiss, and considering the name, they are as ruthless as they sound. Not much to say here, but definitely a potentially important source of drama for Changeling Chronicles. I guess I have to talk about Kindred of the East again. Well, the game has the concepts of yin and yang, not too dissimilar to how we understand them. Yin specifically is related to the negative and absences. No heat, no life, up instead of down, passiveness instead of action, and all that. The Ebon Dragon is Yin incarnate, and is believed to be responsible for the creation of the Kuei Jin. It's also one of the messengers in Hunter the Reckoning for the classic World of Darkness, and is also one of the 2 remaining active angels prior to any Time of Judgment scenario, the other one being its Yang equivalent. I'm going to be honest, there's a point with the classic World of Darkness where they just start saying shit, and it's not even fun like with Tsar Vargo, or fascinating like the Faces of the Worm in different game lines. I'll move on before I get caught up in this ramble. With the Technocratic Union being as Eurocentric as it is, the World Wars intersected with periods of internal strife within the technocracy. In the case of World War I, the aftermath of Queen Victoria's death resulted in a period of directionlessness. Members of the Syndicate attempted to gain power over one another, and by fighting in the battlefield of economics with nations and colonies on the line, the convention ended up worsening tensions between nations. In the case of World War II, technocrats of all conventions saw the Third Reich as a catalyst for bringing about their one world government, and infighting over this ensued. Once it became clear that several reality deviants, particularly the Nefandi, were investing in the slaughter across Europe, the technocracy made a temporary alliance with the Council of Nine Traditions, who were also split over allegiances to the Axis and Allies, to curtail their unnatural influence. Unsurprising to anyone but probably members of the Order of Reason, the rationalist paradigm had been realized elsewhere in the world. Not too long after they were established and looking to expand their influence, they crossed paths with the Mukteshaf al-Noor in the Middle East, which believed that understanding the physical world was part of understanding the spiritual nature of Allah. At this time, the Order of Reason was more amicable to religious paradigms, and the Mukteshaf al-Noor had moved into modern-day Turkey, dissolution with the magical factions of the Arabian Peninsula. The two groups began to slowly merge and overlap, a process that was troubled as the Order of Reason pushed deeper into secularism, and once they were formed into the Technocratic Union, the Mukteshaf al-Noor was on the verge of completely losing itself. A few split off completely, while some have been opening communications with the old allies they initially separated themselves from centuries ago. There are two different uses of the term Lightbringer, barring that Linkara comic that keeps flashing into my brain whenever I read the word Lightbringer. First one is an Exalted as a nickname given to the Dawn cast of the Solar Exalted, who used to be hot shit before the usurpation, but they still kick around. The other use is in Promethean the Created, as the nickname for those of the Phosphorus refinement. This is characterized by impatience and impulsiveness to find all that life has to offer in hopes of fighting life itself. The name comes from the transmutations they employ being Luciferus, which is power over light in its physical and conceptual sense, such as the metaphorical light at the end of the tunnel or the bright side of things, and Volcanus, which is manipulation over the divine fire of Pyros. I don't know what this topic is doing all the way down here, but this is the most relevant stuff I could find. In the 1990s, there was a fan group for Vampire the Masquerade calling itself the Camarilla Fan Club under the permission of White Wolf Publishing. In 1995, there was a change in leadership who didn't exactly have cohesive records for this nebulous agreement. As the fan club started to swell in members, in 1998, the leaders, unaware of the specifics on their agreement with White Wolf, filed a trademark in the US for the name Camarilla. This hit an expected rut that lasted over 4 years, which culminated in White Wolf announcing that they would be taking the trademark back, along with control over the fan club. The Camarilla fan club sued White Wolf over this, and White Wolf countersued. Obviously, the Camarilla fan club was fucked, and White Wolf had the previous leader step down to be replaced by volunteers selected by White Wolf in 2011, with the fan club renamed to the Mind's Eye Society, later the Modern Enigma Society in 2020. Honestly, the story is just a little funny to me given how bold the idea of suing White Wolf over trademarking Camarilla was. Avalon is a name used for various entities in the world of darkness, and like usual, I'll talk about them in ascending relevancy. Firstly, there's Avalon Incorporated, a Pentix subsidiary producing toys. Not too difficult to guess how poisoning the minds of kids works here. Then there's the Lodge of Avalon for Werewolf the Forsaken, which is only featured in the Shadows of the UK sourcebook. Their gimmick is racism. Then there's the Harbingers of Avalon, a covert cell within the technocracy that tries to uphold the ideals held by the Old Order of Reason and the supremacy of Britain. They model themselves based on Arthurian legend, which was once popular among enlightened scientists. Lastly, and for what I assume this entry refers to, is the Baronies of Avalon, 10 fiefdoms across England and Wales, united by the venture Methuselah Mithras, which was around for the Dark Ages vampire setting and is detailed in the Dark Ages Europe sourcebook. The Hermetic Hipster is a YouTuber that made videos discussing Mage Ascension lore and elements of the setting from 2019 to 2023. He published a fan-made sourcebook on Storyteller's Vault titled The Hermetic Hipster's Guide to the 9 Mystic Traditions, which doesn't just explain the faction, but provides several merits and flaws geared towards the traditions, along with 9 playable stories. So we have Dante from Devil May Cry for the Aegis Kaidoru, and the less discussed American rapper Lil Wayne for the Ascending Ones. I actually couldn't get a side-by-side to see what specific image is traced here, but in the mid-2000s there are several pictures of Lil Wayne with these sunglasses and that specific hairstyle, so there's that. Funnily enough, I don't think this is by the same artist who did the Dante trace, so it's possible White Wolf got 2 tracers working on the same book. By the way, I was coming through the Hunter the Vigil core book, and noticed that the Task Force Valkyrie guy literally has an M41A pulse rifle from Aliens. Vampire the Masquerade and Mage Ascension both lay claim to the real occultist and founder of Selema, Aleister Crowley. Initially introduced as a Malkavian for Vampire the Masquerade, he is embraced in 1930 and convinced that he was a Tremere to sully the clan's reputation. Later, in the Cult of Ecstasy sourcebook, he is a former member of that mystic tradition, and supposedly becomes a Nephondist between 1904 and 1921. These narratives don't necessarily conflict. However, a Nephondist becoming a vampire would still destroy their avatar, and therefore end their path to dissension, which they really do not want happening. This makes it reasonable to believe that someone is lying here, and it's far more likely that the mages have the real Crowley, as it's easier to get away with being a mage than to get away with being a vampire. So you have some dots and correspondence. Now what? Are you looking to broaden your horizons with the sphere of distance and connections? Are you looking for more destinations of wonder and terror that correspondence magic might bring you to? May you find your way with Spherebook Correspondence, a fan-made sourcebook for 20th anniversary Mage Ascension, featuring new rules for the correspondence sphere, 17 roads, 5 wonders, 17 destinations including Great Workings, Paradox Realms, and Nodes, and rules for 2 alternate spheres and 2 minor spheres. Trek through the eldritch angled kennels or the dystopian city of 13 o'clock. Hack the world with the data sphere, or eat it for a juicy quintessence with the minor sphere of space. Cross any distance, find every connection, and more with Spherebook Correspondence. Available on DriveThruRPG and Storyteller's Vault for $3.33 USD. Psychic the Gifted is a defunct, last updated 2018, fansplat for the first edition Chronicles of Darkness. It only exists in a technically playable state through a 99-page PDF available on a dedicated website. The Psychics are burdened with constantly perceiving humanity's collective mindscape, trying to limit and focus their exposure while mastering their powers such as clairvoyance, telekinesis, telepathy, and all that good stuff. Psychic characters are defined by their self-explanatory inception and mindset, with a few optional factions for players to align themselves with, whether it's a secret society or a government group. It has a bit of a unique ability system with psychic skills called phenomena, which branch out into more powerful and specific abilities called concentrations. So for the big kinesis phenomena, you can master something like telekinesis or cryokinesis. It's pretty cool, but even the PDF is full of editor's notes, and again, it's now defunct. Dragon the Embers is a fansplat for 1st edition Chronicles of Darkness, with Rekindled being an update for 2nd edition, last updated in around 2017. Getting a hold of it is only mildly convoluted, with the 1st edition available in a 209-page PDF, and the 2nd edition split between posts on the Onyx Path forums and a few Google Docs. In this game, dragons were real as rulers over humanity in the ancient past, and they were brought down with their hearts taken and eaten as sources of power that let humans become dragons. Through consuming the hearts of humans who became dragons, this resource has swapped hands over the eras, as the old first dragons cursed humanity so that anyone who takes the heart will have to fight tooth and claw to keep it, a struggle that will inevitably end in them losing the heart. This universal conflict bears the Ouroboros name adopted by many of the modern dragons. Dragons are capable of passing into a dream realm where their legacy has been too rooted down in the collective consciousness to ever truly fade. This realm is also where they can attain magical abilities called purviews. The dragons are also immortal so long as their heart is intact, and of course they can turn into a fucking dragon, swapping traits here and there with another set of abilities called abulations. Characters are defined by their method, or how they got the dragon heart, and the self-explanatory philosophy, which determines what kind of purviews they lean towards. That's the basics, and it's fascinating stuff. Even among the unfeely houses presented in Changeling the Dreaming, House Baelor is particularly spooky, with very credible legends that their founders descend from Fomorians and their servants, with Baelor himself definitely being a Fomorian. Naturally, there's also a big infernal or eldritch flair to the house, which is represented through the relevant Fomorians of this house being sea dwellers. It's also unsurprising that the Unseelie house would have some investment in the outsider Gaullane, and this is where the Selkies come in. Legend has it that the first Selkies are direct descendants of Baelor, and to this day, The house treats him as a noble kiss for this reason. Not complicated, but certainly a fun fact which can cause some interesting encounters in the Chronicle. Okay, I genuinely stalled myself from writing this one, but here we are. So, in the Chronicles of Darkness Changing Breeds book, there is a disconcerting amount of references to the ferals regularly defecating, such as for communication as detailed in a section titled Shit Speak, or as a result of various derangements specific to the ferals, with a side of stripping here and there too. It's among the problems with this book, if not one of the more distracting ones. In 1993, issues 36, 37, and 38 of the White Wolf magazine would feature a crossover setting for Vampire the Masquerade and Cyberpunk 2020, which were written by Elizabeth D. Brooks. I'm not going to explain the Cyberpunk games here, and assume that when I say megacorporations are now hunting and working with Kindred, you kind of get what I mean. But yeah, megacorporations and the denizens of the cyberpunk world have some common idea about what goes bump in the night, and the Kindred are the most relevant supernatural group in urban matters. Cybernetically enhanced hunters are a new kind of problem that most vampires are ill-equipped to deal with, so many elders have gone full recluse, while thaumaturgists have devised a ritual that allows vampires to make use of cybernetics. The Masquerade is said to fall in only a few years, so they're going to need it. Some vampires have infiltrated gangs and corporations to get by, while the Camarilla is a bit of a mess. A new sect has popped up called the Children of Carthagos, who hope to bring back Carthage as a potential solution for the inevitable collapse of the Masquerade, and naturally the Camarilla has been trying to destroy them. I have mixed feelings about Cyberpunk's world, but this crossover is just a good bit of fun. It's only a tiny 30-page thing split between 3 magazine issues, and you still need a 2nd edition Vampire the Masquerade book to make the game work, and the Cyberpunk 2020 book to understand the world. On June 14th, year of our Lord 1645, the First English Civil War, defined by the clash between the Parliament and the monarchy, was raging on, and would take its fury near the town of Naseby. The mages of the time, as detailed in the Order of Hermes tradition books, were working in the shadows with the Order of Reason backing the parliamentarians, and the traditions backing the royalists. In preparation for the Battle of Naseby, King Charles I enlisted tradition mages to aid his forces and match the mages assisting the parliamentarians. Now, mages had a general understanding of how reality worked differently depending on where it's occurring, how many witnesses there were, and who those witnesses were. They also knew that there were consequences for a mage that executed magic that didn't match the circumstances they were in, and the traditions especially knew that disbelief was becoming a problem. They called this force the Scourge and its negative effects Backlash. Back then, the Scourge wasn't quite as scary as it sounds, and while it was difficult to control, it could influence mages in helpful ways. The specifics are contained within the Sorcerer's Crusade books. So, when the Order of Hermes sent a big number of mages into a battlefield, not just to serve the king but also in hopes of planting a big flag in consensus for the traditions, and then they faced off against a bunch of other mages in the Order of Reason, it quickly spiraled into a disaster. Vulgar magic was executed carelessly, and it wasn't just the Hermeticists, nearly losing 2 houses to the chaos who paid the price. The Scourge no longer provided any benefits to any mages, who would go on to understand this force's paradox. When this entry says, the Battle of Naseby caused paradox, it means that very literally. So this topic is attributed to a comment that seemingly no longer exists, so I had to research this one with no leads, but I think I got it. This one is a bit of a tangle, and I'm not even sure if I understand it, so put on your seatbelts. Back in 2017 on the Onyx Pass forum, there was a discussion about the Dark Era Companion, and its section on the Mutapan Empire in southern Africa. The book talks a bit about the confrontations between the mages of the Pentacle and the mages native to the region, and the discussion on the forum got to talking about whether the book should have given more time on how the Pentacle mages brought the native mages into their fold. Dave Brookshaw, a writer for various Mage the Awakening books, entered the discussion to explain the direction here, which was that the writing deliberately steered away from the idea that the Awakening would force the native mages to do anything, in contrast to the assumption that the relations of the time between Westerners and Africans would lead to violence. This is justified with the idea that the awakened would be unconcerned with the racism of the time and place far more significance on the fact that they found fellow mages. This is where it gets weird because this kind of represents the opposite of what this topic suggests. In fact, Brookshaw's post actually points to Mage the Ascension and its faction's history with colonialism as what they weren't going for. To actually quote him and clarify things, here's the post. It's a typically, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a big honking assumption that the Western mages conquered the other awakened with blood and attack spells, if India, Arabia, and Northern Africa count as Western in your assumptions, because the native mages of those places were diamond a couple centuries earlier than, say, Britain, but that's a digression. Is it because of Mage the Ascension, which linked the movements of its factions to colonialism as a process, and tried to link its based on 90 subcultures factions to losing sides in history to give them a sense of background? Fuck that. The Awakened are made of sterner stuff. When you habitually deal with things that aren't there but are more true than the common matter around you, and you gain your power through a brain-bending encounter with the supernal world, another wizard who happens to dress funny is not going to give you pause. While I think Brookshaw is grossly ignorant as to the creative reasoning for why the Mages of Ascension have a history with colonialism, particularly as to the roles of the technocracy and the traditions that run both sides of colonial conflicts, and also explains the reason why I don't have much interest in Mage the Awakening, this post is where I believe this entry stems from. Before I say anything, I'm talking about Noah the Spoony One Antweiler. Yes, he was a jackass and went off the deep end, which defined his ever-shrinking reputation. That is not really relevant to the story, and with that out of the way, it's time for a scary story. Noah Antweiler, a fan of Vampire the Masquerade, was desperate in his search for a vampire role-playing experience. While he was disappointed with the direction taken by Vampire the Requiem, his hunger led him to the darkest corners of the role-playing community, a Vampire the Requiem LARP group of 30 players. He joined the group with a common mindset of filling in the gap left by the current party. In this case, he would play a Gangrel Carcian, a true outsider and rebel at heart. Once role-playing commenced, Noah's character would introduce himself to the prince as per the customs of the court. Unfortunately for Noah, the court was dominated by Lancea et Sanctum, who at first ridiculed him before kidnapping his character so he could be mentally tortured and compelled into changing his covenant. After changing his covenant and having a discussion to potentially rework his character to prevent something like this from happening again, he returned to the game and created several quantities of improvised explosives. The doorman for the court seemingly paid no mind to the man walking into the court packed with explosives as per the many cards stuck onto him. Roleplay unfolded, as several explosive notes were left in the court, and then put to a halt when the narrative would have seen them detonated. His little scheme was blocked by the storyteller and he was ejected from the group. Was this a total jackass move that was extremely characteristic of Antweiler? Yes. Was this group unreasonably shitty and kind of earned getting their session derailed like this? Also yes. In the Warhammer Fantasy Battles and Warhammer Age of Sigmar war games, the Skaven are a faction composed entirely of extremely evil humanoid rats. They are as plentiful as actual rats and live in subterranean tunnels, occasionally pillaging or quietly poisoning cities through acts of sabotage and assassination. While the Ratkin are not at all as numerous, nor are they as evil as the Skaven, they do have the inclination to sabotage and assassinate, specifically to impede human development. The Ratkin also have a degree of universal derangement due to the birthing plague that creates them, and the Skaven are not known for their mental stability. You can also draw several rough parallels between Ratkin aspects and Skaven types, such as Knife Skulkers and Clan Eshin Assassins, Warriors and Clan Rats, Engineers and Warlock Engineers, and the Plague Lords and Plague Priests. Personally, I do think there's an influence, but also if you were to do a serious take on intelligent humanoid rats for a setting like the World of Darkness, you would stumble into the same ideas that Game Workshop did for the Skaven. Rats as animals have been associated with cunning and plagues long before the people who made these games were even alive. Just like in our world, demon is not a rigid term in the World of Darkness nor the Chronicles of Darkness, and really just refers to malevolent spirits. Fallen angels, jinn, asuras, yokai, yaogwai, whatever. We just understand those as demons, and the world of darkness has a similar situation. Vampires and werewolves view the world about as differently as the Algonquin and Chinese do. And to explain this entry, I'll break down what the World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness have been calling demons. In the World of Darkness, I'll start with the ones closest to the traditional understanding of the word. The Fallen of Demon the Fallen are fallen angels that were cast into the abyss after rebelling against God. They can slip out of the abyss to take material hosts such as humans or reliquaries. Human host is where the players come in, and the reliquaries house the Earthbound, the mighty and deranged antagonists for Demon the Fallen. Whatever the Infernalist Nefandi, Dark Thaumaturge vampires, and Bali vampires are working with can be called demons with relatively little pushback, though they probably aren't the same things. 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade has given their brand of demons the name of the Apilu, and that's probably because if they actually called them demons, there would be implications the setting is currently not ready to handle. The Apilu are basically spirits tied to or heavily invested in the vampiric condition, and they provide capital G gifts to vampires that appease them, which leads me to Banes, most relevant in Werewolf the Apocalypse, are pretty straightforward evil spirits, ergo demons. They even possess people and try to nudge humans into doing bad things. Spectres can play the part of a demon in their agendas, but the plasmic demonics are a little more close to tradition. Kindred of the East has the Yama Kings, which rule over a bunch of hellish realms. You could even call them devils, and that would make sense. The Kuei-jin also views the province's darker aspect of their soul as demonic, and perhaps even the beast from Vampire the Masquerade can be viewed as demonic as well. Chronicles of Darkness's first real foray into the demonic came in the form of World of Darkness Inferno, a source book for demons. Following the direction laid out by the new setting, they take an exceptionally agnostic yet focused approach. There's a hell full of evil spirits, and they make dark pacts with mortals to give them lethal hits or sustained hits won. Are they fallen angels? Maybe, but if you look at them, you'll probably think that's certainly a demon. Mage the Awakening has the Abyssal Akamoths, which are pretty demonic as far as abyssal entities go, and there's the Goetic Demons, which are not demons spoken of in the real Ars Goetia, but rather manifestations of the inner demon idea that can occasionally pop up when a mage is ruminating on past failures. Lastly, there's the Unchained of Demons of Descent. These are agents of the God Machine, typically referred to as angels, that broke free from its influence and now hide amongst humans to evade capture. It's the fallen angel myth transplanted into the God Machine narrative, basically. I must say, with the old World of Darkness Gypsy book in mind, I'm actually a little surprised by how not extremely ignorant and racist the old Dreamspeakers lore was. There was certainly an evolution to their presentation from the 1st edition Mage Ascension War rulebook. Discussion about them has pivoted away from Gaia specifically, as that's an extremely loaded term in the World of Darkness. Medicine was also emphasized as a common perspective for their will working, and how they were grouped together from several disparate cultures was acknowledged as a clumsy act by the Council. By 20th Anniversary Edition, the Dream Speakers were characterized by a degree of overt animosity towards the other traditions, but that's a symptom of Onyx's problems with writing about things like the Dream Speakers. That's a can of worms for another time. If you're familiar with Meiji Ascension, specifically the Verbena, there's a slight chance you may have heard the idea that mages use anti-vaxxers against the technocratic consensus. However, I have not been able to uncover any specific excerpt supporting this. It's not that anti-vax freaks don't exist in the World of Darkness, or that this idea couldn't make for an interesting plot hook, but these kinds of desperate anti-intellectual measures for the Ascension War that we might see in our own lives aren't talked about a lot, even in 20th Anniversary Mage. This is an odd inclusion even by the admission of this Iceberg's creator, as it has no relation to the World of Darkness nor the Chronicles of Darkness, but They Came From Beneath the Sea is an Onyx Path game spearheaded by Matthew Dawkins, who has done writing for a lot of World of Darkness stuff. He's also on YouTube as The Gentleman Gamer, where he makes videos talking about the World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness, Curseborn, which he is a writer for, and more within the domain of TTRPGs. Back to the game, it's based around Pulp Fiction and B-movies, with this game centered around fighting aliens coming from the sea, and player characters fulfilling various archetypes, such as scientists, survivors, and snoopy journalists. The narrative of this game is also determined by fourth wall breaking logic that acknowledges that the narrative actually takes place in a movie, and players can pull tricks like making the scene fade to black so they can get out of trouble. Frankly, I think it's pretty awesome, which is why I'm not dismissive about it like I am with the Exalted and other odd entries not actually related to the World of Darkness. They Came From Beneath the Sea came out in early 2020, and would be followed by several games for different settings. For example, They Came From Beneath the Grave is all about classic monster stories, and They Came From Camp Murder Lake is all about early slasher movies. Blood-Dimmed Tides is a sourcebook published in 1999 for all of the World of Darkness games up to that point in time, centered around all the goings-on of the Seven Seas. This features several rules related for gameplay and aquatic scenarios, details on how the supernatural forces deal with it, and several threats one can find beneath the blood-dimmed tides. It's actually a bit of a silly read, but there's also some interesting stuff here, such as the Mariner Gangrel bloodline, the Rorqual, half-spirit whales that transport quintessence, the Jishaquoto labyrinths of the Nefandi, off the coast of Santa Barbara, two unique kiths based around the aquatic, and the Chulorvia, an eldritch plague that creates monsters in the deepest reaches of the sea. The Wraiths actually get a lot of stuff here too for aquatic haunts and naval activities. They might actually be the winners of this book, so to speak, but the main reason I'm talking about Blood-Dimmed Tides is because the book's reputation may or may not be carried by having one of the silliest and most bizarre covers for any World of Darkness book. I talked about the Usurpation, where the Solar Exalted were torn down from their position of power, primarily by the terrestrial dragon-blooded Exalted, but I didn't explain why that happened. Basically, the Sidereal Exalted, mostly oracles, mystics, and martial artists, said that, according to a prophecy, the Solar Exalted would fail them in the future, which would lead to the destruction of the world, unless everyone just killed the Solar Exalted. This was called the Great Prophecy, but the Great Deception term comes from the possibility that this Sidereal Exalted just lied about this. Just a heads up, since this is the kind of topic where sensitivity towards it isn't uncommon, I'll be talking about unserious depictions of rape, and a timestamp was on screen to skip that. I might be somewhat progressive, but I'm also not one to get up in arms about this kind of thing, nor talk about why it's problematic, because that's not what this video is about, and unlike the Gypsy book, there's no misconception for me to debunk. I'll just be explaining this book and provide my opinion, mostly leaving critical analysis at the door to keep things on track. I'll leave ethical concerns for the viewers to or to not contemplate. Eternal Hearts is an official 156-page erotic novel set in the world of Vampire the Masquerade, published in 1999 and written by Lucy Taylor and featuring artwork by John Bolton. This is, in fact, a book with cocks, boobs, and vaginas. It features characters such as Lucita de Aragon, Sasha Vikos, Victoria Ash, and John Peter Zun, getting entangled with each other amidst the clash between the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and mortal hunters. As this is the kind of book to get wrapped in hyperbole, but also does open up with a woman getting raped by 5 vampires, I read this book myself to see what the fuss is about. My impression of this book is that it's very gross, and not often written to be titillating in its depictions of rape and necrophilia intertwined with graphic violence. This book doesn't spring up from nowhere, and there's a preface that explains how the vampire myth is tied to sensuality and eroticism. But this is a black dogging of Vampire the Masquerade, so yeah, it's really gross. As I said before, any analysis of ethics or whatever is beyond the scope of this video. Read and or jack off to this one at your own discretion. The Pooka kith from Changeling the Dreaming have some kind of animal form that they can turn into. The animal is one they have a deep affinity with, and it could be a long while before one Pooka meets another of their kith with the same animal affinity. There are some common ones like cats, dogs, rodents, and farm animals, but for some reason, things have been changing as the setting approaches the 21st century. a few Pooka started to find themselves with affinities for more exotic animals, such as reptiles, sharks, and as this entry refers to, penguins. Nothing crazy, but kinda crazy, I guess. Unsurprisingly, Antarctica isn't among the most active places in the World of Darkness, nor the Chronicles of Darkness, but it has its secrets, of course. In 20th Anniversary Changeling a Dreaming, there are rumors of some kiss settling in the so-called Land of Eternal Winter, where Selkies and the penguin Pookas I talked about earlier dwell. Maybe the speculation on the region provides a good lick of glamour or something, but that's not for certain. Switching from changelings to changing breeds, a group of particularly insane Ratkin dwelling in Antarctica's umbral reflection are mentioned in the Ratkin Breed book. I talked about WTOJ toward the end of the last video, where during the Time of Judgment, White Wolf put up a website that would post end time feed updates styled like news reports. The last one, for January 14th, 2004, reads as follows. Last words from Antarctica. The crew of the American Antarctic Coastal Station has vanished shortly after a desperate email was dispatched to Washington, D.C. The text of the email was simply, "The blood gods are here." Communication with Palmer Coastal Station has been similarly silent. In the Time of Judgment Gehenna sourcebook, a potential place to put the Nosferatu antediluvian is Antarctica, and for a bit of insight into my process for working on this video, when I hear multiple people say something that a book also hints towards another book saying, but I can't find a specific excerpt, I'll assume beyond a reasonable doubt that it's true. In this case, a lot of online discussion claims that a book says that there is an unknown beast of the worm slumbering beneath Antarctica, and I can confirm that the Gehenna sourcebook says that werewolf lore hints towards something real bad being beneath Antarctica. I can access every pre-20th anniversary werewolf book, but I'm not going to comb through all of them to find out which book mentions this Antarctic mystery. If you do know the book with this mention, please do share. Now, to get things back on track, these two narratives don't conflict with one another, under the classic World of Darkness's understanding that vampires are worm-tainted, so it may very well be good old Familiar down there in either game line. Mages have their interests there as well, as an entrance to Hollow Earth for the Aetherites, a frontier for the Void Engineers, and a generally strange place for the Nefandi. If the World of Darkness leans towards any specific powerful entity in Antarctica, it's likely the Nosferatu antediluvian. Over in Chronicles of Darkness, the most significant bit of Antarctic activity comes from Lodges the Splintered, which is not a Chronicles game you never heard of, but a Werewolf the Forsaken sourcebook. Here, we have the Lodge of the Lake, which has been around for over a century, but in 1970, the Soviets uncovered a bit of a petrified feminine face in the ice. That immediately caught the Uras's attention, so they stole it, and then the face started talking to them, which compelled the werewolves into serving the so-called Lady of the Lake. While once welcoming, the lodge is now controlled by balehounds, who forced the visiting Urasa to pledge loyalty to the Lady of the Lake. Given that the ones who stole the mask have become balehounds, it's likely that the Lady of the Lake is actually a male djinn, in which case Lamashtu is a good suspect. I think some wires might be crossed here, as the Scarlet Empress is a figure from Exalted, but there is a Scarlet Queen who is relevant to the Imbued. So, in the Storyteller's Companion for Hunter the Reckoning, the introductory chapter provides background knowledge on the Imbued and the messengers that only a storyteller should know. Here it says that the ministers would imbue humans in God's absence to push back the forces of darkness. The only ministers of note, as far as I know, are the Scarlet Queen and the Ebon Dragon from Kindred of the East, and the former is far more likely to make something like the Imbued. The Storyteller's Companion obviously doesn't say that this is indisputably canon and that if you reject the story, White Wolf will send hitmen to skin you alive, but this is presented as a grand revelation of sorts that players shouldn't know about. It's a dominant canon in the way that Vampire the Masquerade hardly provides anything if you don't want to do Nodus history. This is another not World of Darkness thing, specifically this is from Trinity Aberrant, which is all about superheroes, and Project Utopia is a faction that's like the United Nations-backed good guy superheroes, with a game that leans into tropes of the genre, and the other factions are like superhero extremists, superhero cops, and superhero mercenaries. It's pretty easy to understand where Project Utopia fits into this world. Back to that period where a lot of the World of Darkness had content amounting to "we do things a little different here in China," the Dragons of the East sourcebook for Mage the Ascension is all about mages in Asia. The Daolu Lashi, aka the Five Elemental Dragons, were the craft masons of their time and region. They collaborated with the Order of Reason during its founding, but they conducted their own operations in Asia under the notice of both the Order of Reason and later the Technocratic Union. Quite frankly, even the Dragons of the East sourcebook isn't very good at laying them out, but each dragon is somewhat analogous to a technocratic convention, though they had no Iteration X analog, and they had the Spirit Dragon, which was kind of like the NWO with a religious bent to it. In the Technocracy Reloaded sourcebook for 20th Anniversary Mage, a lot of this was explicitly retconned due to the clumsiness that came with a lot of the Mystic Asia stuff from the classic World of Darkness, and to align with a new creative direction for the Technocracy. The dragons were made into methodologies for the conventions, with the Spirit Dragon thrown out entirely, and the White Metal Dragon becoming the Iteration X analog. It's handled with all the haughtiness that Paradox tells readers that want to play is just about to fuck off, if you know what I mean. In the Kith and Kin sourcebook for Changeling the Lost, we are presented with the Lunar Freehold. There's a little spin on the resurgence of Changeling the Dreaming, and the first unmanned lunar landing by the Soviets extended the Hedge's influence all the way to the moon. There are 4 courts and 3 characters attached to this freehold, as presented in the sourcebook. In spite of my efforts, I was unable to find any official content pertaining to humans who eat vampires for power. I also could not find a comment on the original Iceberg post that suggested this topic, so I was a little lost for leads. Well, independent ghouls who hunt vampires to harvest their vitae have been around for a while, which is close, but not quite what this entry seems to be referring to. Additionally, there's the Harvesters from the Immortal sourcebook for Chronicles of Darkness, who take the powers of longevity from other supernatural beings to extend their own lives, but this is done through a specific instrument rather than any kind of flesh-eating ritual. While there is a lick of hyperbole to this one, the 20th Anniversary Mage Ascension Core rulebook talks about thought forms as an instrument, essentially a kind of construct born from the collective consciousness. The term emetic entity might make sense to some of you, and that's kind of what a thought form is. In a list of example thought forms based on mainstream media, Mickey Mouse is mentioned as a thought form. God forms were introduced in the Gods and Monsters sourcebook, but Mickey Mouse is not presented among its list of examples. Curseborn was announced not long after Paradox unceremoniously pulled the plug on their Chronicle of Darkness and 20th Anniversary game lines. Rumor has it that Curseborn was made to spite Paradox for this. However, I think this undersells Curseborn. There's a certain malaise that comes with the reputation of being a creation made out of spite, when I think there's more to Curseborn than that, both for its creators and its fans as a new take on dark urban fantasy. Also, from the creators behind Curseborn that have publicly spoken about Paradox's role in Onyx Path moving to Curseborn, they aren't particularly pissed about it, though professionalism can certainly suppress any displays of anger. I'd understand any feelings of spite they might have, but ultimately this is just a rumor. Rites of pleasure, sexuality in neo-paganism, and Wicca is unfortunately not secretly the most bonkers Mage Ascension sourcebook you've never heard of. It's just a 2004 non-fiction book about exactly what its title describes, but Phil Ricardo, an author who worked on a lot of World of Darkness books and a pagan, is among the people who was interviewed for it. Odin, the wise patriarch of the ancient Norse pantheon, needs little introduction for an audience like this, but according to some Gangrel clan books and Dark Ages supplements, a 4th generation Gangrel Methuselah assumed the role of Odin in Scandinavia to gain a powerful mortal following. He fought against the Roman Empire and the local Guru, especially of the Geta Fenris. However, in the 11th century, the Christianization of Sweden curtailed his influence, and he was hunted by warriors of faith. He would eventually take voluntary torpor, but his empty tomb was uncovered in 1977 by a descendant, surrounded by the drained corpse of the werewolf, so it's likely he's lurking in the shadows in anticipation for Gehenna. On a related note, the Geta Fenris have various tales about an ancient clash of mythical proportions with a figure they called Odin. In this war, Odin was killed by the spirit of Fenris himself, only for Odin to return as a worm-tainted monstrosity, and was then beaten back into the Umbra. It's almost certain that this is the same Odin talked about in the vampire books, perhaps being a mage of some kind before being embraced. However, where one truth ends and a lie begins is unclear. As one of the most important figures in European history, Alexander of Macedonia left his impression on two of the big traditions in that region, the Order of Hermes and the Celestial Chorus. The Hermeticists take advantage of how Alexander brought several cultures together, ranging from the Persian to the Egyptian, which provided the basis for Hermeticist tradition. The choristers benefited in a similar way, as several disparate choruses began to come into contact with one another. Does the Garu litany piss you off? Did you feel disappointed when you found out that you, a beast of rage, cannot participate in the prehistoric War of Rage? Do you just want to fight a fucking mammoth? Bring on the Savage Age. Written by past contributors to 20th Anniversary Werewolf the Apocalypse, this vast collection of source books let players explore a time of legend and paint it red. Get started with Accounting for the Dead, explore the rise of the Guru, and arm yourself with the tools of extinction. If that's not enough for you, we have 7 tribe books, ranging from the rare Dimetrodons of the Core to the direwolf fare of the Nagalu. We have a short story collection, we have 101 Savage Kinfolk, we have a fucking comic, all with incredible artwork and meticulous writing. Tear into the War of Rage with the Savage Age, available on DriveThruRPG and Storyteller's Vault. Books range in price from $5 to $20, with the Essential Accounting for the Dead book priced at $15. Readers with eyeballs and a bit of pop culture knowledge might notice some stylistic and conceptual parallels between Mage the Awakening and Demon the Descent, and the Matrix film series. I'm going to assume that you guys are at least familiar with the premise of the Matrix movies, and to get through this topic one bite at a time, I'll break down what's going on with Mage the Awakening first. While there is a fleeting reference to the Matrix in its list of first edition inspirations, the game itself has 2 worlds, with one hidden from the unawakened masses who are kept ignorant by powerful forces. The fallen world is the Matrix, the big AI overseeing the Matrix is swapped out with the Exarchs, and things diverge from there. As for Demon the Descent, it does note the Matrix as one of its influences, and to cut a bit into the Matrix movies themselves, the non-human program characters like Agent Smith are a decent place to start thinking about the thinking elements of the God Machine's forces. As many have stated in these discussions, Demon the Descent is kind of like playing as the rogue programs from the Matrix. The God Machine itself can be seen as a more alien take on the almost ever-present influence of the Matrix. So yeah, both of these games have a similar premise to the Matrix movies, but are obviously inspired by other creative works. If you ever wondered where the Creature of the Black Lagoon and similar aquatic terrors fit into the Chronicles of Darkness, Leviathan the Tempest has you covered. Leviathan was created back in 2010 as a collaborative project on the RPGNet forums, before getting coalesced into a 266-page PDF, and a wiki organized like a book. It was also in the process of being brought into 2nd edition under the Cold Chronicles name, but this has seemingly hit a rut. Players assume the role of descendants of the Eldritch Tiamat, who have realized their monstrous origin, and now must follow a society which seems to only poison everything around them through the hypnotic influence of the Wake. Humans and even supernatural beings weaker in power to the Leviathan have their minds warped, and the Leviathans use this force to foster cults around them. That's one important element this game explores, though the search for power to push back those who resist the Wake's effect may lead Leviathans into the Rift, a strange realm beneath the waves that is all that's left of the primordial seas they once emerged from. While Leviathans can unleash their true forms if needed, they can also employ vestiges, faint traces of power held by their progenitors, as abilities that can be advanced. What vestiges a Leviathan can use are primarily defined by their strain, or the progenitor from which they descend, and their school, their philosophical outlook. So, manage cults, uncover mysteries, fight King Kong, don't turn into a sea monster, and survive. Basic Chronicles of Darkness stuff, really. Complete honesty here, I looked up Vampire the Dark Ages cancelled video game, and found a list of cancelled World of Darkness products, and people complaining about Bloodlines 2. Maybe that's why it's all the way down here and it's just that obscure. According to the person who suggested this topic, it was supposed to be some kind of strategy game. I'll make up for this absence later. In the Axis Mundi, the Book of Spirits sourcebook for Werewolf the Apocalypse, in a section for particularly enigmatic spirits, we can find the Sagrana, which are somewhat humanoid praying mantises wearing red robes and hats akin to those worn by Catholic cardinals. They can be found not in the Deep Umbra as the topic says, but somewhere near the Flux realm, in a very surreal garden they consider to be the quote-unquote last safe place, where they ponder math and philosophy. Apparently, they were attacked by the werespiders in the not-too-distant past, love chess even if they don't know how to play it, have a positive opinion on the Stargazers, and do not care for technology, which gives them a negative opinion on the Glasswalkers. If you couldn't tell, this is just an experiment in weirdness, so don't think about it too hard. Gargoyle the Vigil is a fan game for the classic World of Darkness created back in 1996. Players assume the roles of classic gargoyles, more like what you see on the Gargoyles animated TV show, and not the abominations that Tremere had out 1,000 years ago. This does mean that you play as obviously inhuman monsters that have no hope of mingling with humans, and they're petrified during the day as well. There actually isn't too much to work with Chronicles-wise, but there is a mega corporation the gargoyles have beef with, and a lot of rules for using both unnatural powers and fighting while using the gargoyle's monstrous form to its full advantage. Kinda interesting, but definitely the least detailed fan game I've talked about so far. This is an easy one to run through. Juliet Parr, the Malkavian Justicar, was 17 at the time of her embrace. Madame Guile, the Toreador Justicar, former Toreador Justicar in 5th edition, was 16 at the time of her embrace, and Alicia Barrows, an Archbishop presiding over Mexico City, was 18 at the time of her embrace. If we want to include a teenage boy who's impersonating an adult woman, Zachary Sikorsky, a Sabbat member impersonating the Regent, was 16 at the time of his embrace. So there's the Chayas HaKodesh, which is just a faction of particularly violent marauders, and Team 23, introduced in the revised edition of the Book of Madness, is a cabal aligned with them. After a disaster while trying to create a highly immersive first-person shooter, each of its members are trapped in a collective delusion that they're all just playing a very immersive video game, where they fight demons and monsters using big guns and are protected by big suits of armor. They talk about kill counts, rival clans, and they all have game rat usernames like Blood Knight with zeros in it. I saw someone mention this and it wasn't on the original Iceberg, so I threw it in. On this Iceberg, I've covered Princess the Hopeful, Genius the Transgression, Psychic the Gifted, Dragon the Embers, Leviathan the Tempest, and Gargoyle the Vigil. With those covered, that solves a somewhat well-known fansplats, and from there, they become far more obscure and they also aren't often as detailed. To be thorough, here's the final obscure fansplat roundup, pulling a few entries on the Iceberg into this one to be swift. I'll cover the premise and what subtypes are available to the players. If you're not interested in the long list of fansplats I'm going to list off, a timestamp should be on the TV for you to skip ahead and get back right into the trivia. In Alien the Stranded, players assume the roles of extraterrestrials that have for one reason or another found themselves stuck on Earth. they must hide amongst humans and find out what to do from there, as incidental denizens of the Chronicles of Darkness. Player characters are defined by their taxa, the archetype of alien they are, and their occupatio, their background prior to marooning on Earth. Alien the Stranded is for the Chronicles of Darkness, compatible with the God Machine Chronicle rules, made in 2013, and has been archived on 1d6chan. In Atlantean the Longing, players assume the roles of descendants of the lost city of Atlantis, who are compelled to explore the surface in order to repel the forces of pollution that threaten their home. As they spend time on the surface, they become homesick and lose their powers, which means that each strike made to defend their home must be calculated. Player characters are defined by their class, the depths at which they dwell, and there are a few Atlantean societies one can align themselves with. Atlantean the Longing is for the classic World of Darkness, made in 2020, and is available on itch.io. In Chosen the Judgment, players assume the roles of monster hunters who, in a time of peril, prayed for divine guidance or aid and ended up with an angel of questionable nature and intent, choosing them for a spiritual symbiosis arrangement. Through enhancing their synergy, they can become more powerful, however risk losing themselves, as the Chosen can either be completely consumed by the angel or fall to become a demon. Player characters are defined by their superior, the type of angel that chose them, which also prescribes a specific dominion, which are just magical powers. Chosen the Judgment is for 5th edition World of Darkness, made in the future, and is consequently currently unavailable. In Demonio la Redención, players assume the roles of Nephilim, demons that have escaped from the Malbolge and have taken human hosts to hide themselves. It's a reimagining of Demon the Fallen for the Chronicles of Darkness, but a bit more romanticist, with redemption being more in center stage. Player characters are defined by their house and creed, which are a bit similar to the house and faction categories of Demon the Fallen. Demonio la Redención is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in 2011, written in Spanish, and is currently unavailable, but some important elements have been archived on a TV tropes page. In Empyrean the Redemption, players assume the roles of the Reborn, humans who have had their damaged souls supplemented by a fractured divine force. Through their newfound celestial powers, both aspects of the Reborn try to seek redemption for letting the world succumb to darkness. Player characters are defined by their aspect, the type of divinity accompanying them, which is based on archetypical gods such as chaotic nature gods, war gods, and trickster gods, and their creed, their philosophical outlook, which are based on types of religion. Empyrean the Redemption is for the Chronicles of Darkness and was made in 2015 as a collaborative project on the Onyx Path forum, where it can be found to this day. In Giant the Perfidious, players assume the roles of giants from folktales. Understanding this one is a bit difficult as it's very incomplete and doesn't explain its central ideas in a coherent manner, but it's for the Chronicles of Darkness and seems to solely exist on 1d6chan. In Gray's The Abduction, players assume the roles of aliens that interact with humans. Their motive is based on which one of the 3 types of aliens a player chooses for the character. Gray's The Abduction is for the classic World of Darkness, was made in 1997, and is available to read through an archived website. In Highlander the Gathering, or later Immortal the Gathering, players assume the roles of the Immortals as seen in the Highlander movies. It generally aims to replicate the mythos of that movie, so it's really straightforward. You can only be killed by decapitation, and killing other immortals lets you steal their power. Highlander the Gathering is for the classic World of Darkness, has received a fan-made update for 5th edition with expanded rules, which is honestly really damn good, made in 1992, which makes it the first well-known fan game for the World of Darkness, and is available on a dedicated website. In Hunchback the Lurching, players assume the roles of the archetypical hunchback seen through characters such as Quasimodo and Igor, though not exclusively. It explores the associated tropes such as servitude, romance, and alienation. Player characters are defined by their marquee, the nature of their supernatural deformity, their sanctuary, the kind of master they seek out to work under, and potentially also their rue, kind of like a profession or habit. Hunchback the Lurching is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in 2020, and is available on the World of Darkness fandom wiki, which is not to be confused with the White Wolf wiki. In Senshi the Merchandising, players assume the roles of children empowered by their collective emotional resonance with the Sailor Moon anime and similar TV shows. It's a parody, obviously, but there's some serious work here. Player characters are defined by their clique and wield various powers to transform into a magical form or just use magic, often using merchandise as a focus for their powers. Senshi the Merchandising is for the classic World of Darkness, made in 1989, and is available on an archives website. In Janus the Persona, players assume the roles of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde-like individuals with a malignant alternate personality, their shadow, which actively resists their better half. A Janus has the power to create concoctions which allow for introspective mind trips and can provide other mechanical benefits. Player characters are defined by their temperament, the behavior and desires of their shadow, and their agency, a society that gravitates towards certain virtues. Janus the Persona is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in 2014 and is available on a Google Doc. In Monarch the Endless, players assume the roles of humans abducted by a distant alien race and converted into servants for furthering their agendas on Earth. In this way, there's a little tiptoe between sci-fi, noble house drama, and personal conflict as beings with dual identities. Player characters are defined by their caste, their purpose in the alien agenda, and their court. Monarch the Endless is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in 2015, and is available through posts on the Onyx Path forum and the Giant in the Playground forum. Mutant the Aberration is borderline lost media, as it was abandoned several years ago, but premise-wise it's a bit self-explanatory, and it was for the Chronicles of Darkness. If you look for it, you'll get half-remembered systems more than anything else. In Outsider the Calling, players assume the roles of people influenced by eldritch forces, which grant powers that gradually corrupt the mind, body, and even the world around them. It's heavily based on the Cthulhu mythos, with player characters defined by their sect, the Great Old One or Outer God influencing the character, and their creed, their relationship with the cosmic horror. Outsider the Calling is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in or prior to 2014, and the PDF for it can be found easily through a Google search. In Pathogen the Infected, players assume the roles of humans that have contracted a disease that awakens their biology to aggressively and unnaturally mutate. Big body horror elements here. Player characters are defined by their vector, how they became infected, their symptom, the main ways their disease manifests, and their subversion, lesser but still important manifestations of the disease which also grant powers. Pathogen the Infected is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in or prior to 2010, and while there are a few versions floating around, the most complete version is on the easy-to-find Google Doc, and the most recently updated version is on a dedicated website. In Siren the Drowning, players assume the roles of mythical sirens, but with a twist, as they are actually humans that have been tasked with averting a future apocalypse known as the Deluge. They have been given a glimpse of this event, and are gifted with a kind of mermaid form. Player characters are defined by their waters, the waters they saw during their glimpse into the Deluge, and their current, the method they wish to use in order to beat back the Deluge. Siren the Drowning is for the Chronicles of Darkness, conceptualized in 2013, and is mostly laid out in a few posts on the RPGNet forums and the Onyx Path forums. In Sovereign the Autonomy, players assume the roles of the first truly autonomous robots. There's not a clear-cut objective for all robots, but player characters are defined by their primary objective, which is self-explanatory, and their domain, what they are built and programmed for. There are a lot of very technical systems for how these robots work, with several unique abilities, merits, and flaws, all based around being a machine. Sovereign the Autonomy is for the Chronicles of Darkness, made in 2011, and seems to mostly be laid out on 1d6chan. In Race the Arising, players assume the roles of ghosts and a truly spiritual successor to Race the Oblivion, but for the Chronicles of Darkness, and made with considerations for that setting. So we don't get to the Dark Kingdoms, but Race still have to deal with their shadow. If you get Race the Oblivion, it's pretty easy to digest what's going on in Race the Arising. While I couldn't find an exact period, this game was made at least prior to Geist the Sin Eater and not long after the New World of Darkness kicked off, so somewhere between 2004 and 2008. The most complete version of this game is in a PDF available on the blog of one Faust91X. For our last fan game, in Zombie the Coil, players assume the roles of people brought back from the dead with at least some mental faculties intact. player characters are defined by how fresh or decayed their corpse is, which determines much more than just appearances and physical abilities. Zombie the Coil is for the classic World of Darkness, made in 2001, and can be found on the Internet Archive. First mentioned in the first edition Book of the Worm, and again in its second edition, the Vujunka are a race of supernaturally attuned entities dwelling deep beneath the earth that are seemingly corrupted by the worm. They have some psychic powers, work with Banes, and live in subterranean cities that we get no details on. I believe they could be ancient servants of the worm, completely disconnected from human society like some kind of civilization of Fomori, but that's my speculation. They really are just a neat little mystery for storytellers to fool around with in their own chronicles. Both the classic World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness have talked about human descendants of demons with the term demon-blooded. In the classic World of Darkness, there's the Nephilim or Laham, whose demonic heritage confers a spiritual tie to the High Umbra, various enhancements related to demons and magic, and some physical flaws due to their unstable nature. Sometimes they awaken, and a few even become Nefandi of the Infernalist sect, where their heritage is a powerful mark of status. These individuals are described in the source books Infernalism, the Path of Screams, the Book of Secrets, and various Demons of Fallen source books. In Chronicles of Darkness, the Heirs to Hell source book for Demon the Descent presents the demon-blooded, which are naturally a little more complicated due to the nature of the Unchained and their covers. It makes conceiving them rare but not impossible, and they come in 3 categories. Offspring are the children of humans and the Unchained, who gain an embed and a glitch. Latents are the descendants of offspring, which typically don't harbor unnatural qualities unless they have an encounter with the unnatural, in which case they can turn into an offspring. And fractals, which are the children of 2 Unchained, which are more powerful than offspring but harder to hide from the God Machine. While this borders on being a joke entry, enough overt parallels exist between the World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness for the possibility of these settings being alternate timelines to be seriously considered. I haven't been able to find a comprehensive list of the parallels, someone should get on that, but one could point to the vampire clan names, the male djinn of Werewolf the Forsaken. Oh, fuck off. The male djinn of Werewolf the Forsaken, the Tremere Liches of Mage the Awakening, the Compact of the Reckoning and Hunter the Vigil, along with the Conspiracy of the Cainite Heresy, as concepts that are refracted through different lenses into 2 settings, or divergences if you want to use alternate timeline terminology. Among the lost changing breeds is the Mokole Varna of the Owl, the Wereturtles, which were first mentioned in the Changing Breed sourcebook for 20th Anniversary Werewolf the Apocalypse. Gifted with longevity that was exceptional even among the Mokole, they acted as the wisest sages for their breed. However, starting in 540 BCE, they started to slowly vanish, and they seemed to know why, but never explained it. By 100 CE, there were no more Owl, and despite the ancestral memory the Mokole can draw upon, they can't pinpoint a cause for their disappearance, and it has been left to conjecture. Some theories include that they were simply phased out and will return later once needed, or that they have been drawn into the Umbra for one reason or another. You guys know what an anemone is, right? Those little polyp things you can find at the bottom of a big body of water? Apparently, in the prehistory of the classic World of Darkness, there were giant intelligent anemones that moved around like slugs and were servants of the Krill, the were-shark Rokea's take on the worm. These monsters were called the Kiral, and they could shift into an almost humanoid shape. With their corrupted gifts of stealth that can render them invisible, these were-anemones were pretty dangerous, but they would ultimately be foiled by a pact made by the Rokea and the spirits of the sea, which could pierce the Kiral's powers of invisibility. The modern anemone that we all know and definitely love now are actually the descendants of the Kiral. This whole legend comes from the Rokea breed book, and of course it's not significant at all, but I can't let the existence of these rare anemone things just go unmentioned here. Just so we're all on the same page, in Race to Oblivion, the Labyrinth is the weird bottom floor of reality right before you hit Oblivion, which was created by the Neverborn Malfians in the distant past. Naturally, it's a mess down here, and it's not easy to explain in any simple terms. Storytellers can freestyle some horrifying shit, and it's unlikely to contradict with any published texts, but just as there is the far dreaming or the deep umbra, race can reach into some truly unfathomable depths in the labyrinths. As described in the Doomslayer's Into the Labyrinth sourcebook, beneath the shadowlands of the moon and further out, there are specters from what are rumored to be pre-human races or non-human entities entirely. Going even further with the Book of Oblivion for 20th Anniversary Wraith, it is said that by going deep enough into the labyrinths, one might find, quote, fragments of worlds that existed long before the Earth or mortal man, or that came into being long after they perished. Sometimes these books really do just kind of say shit, but Makola and Sons of Ether lore talk about ancient lizard people and the Hollow Earth, while Nefandi lore does posit the existence of discarded worlds before Earth in the form of the Klippa. We've also talked about the Vujunka, so there's clearly a lot of stuff that, for better or worse, is seemingly only remembered by the labyrinths. Notice: the following has been fact-checked by true Cainite heretics. The Cainite heresy was a vampiric religious movement most relevant to the Dark Ages setting, which was primarily influenced by Gnosticism. It posits that vampirism is a heightened state of being, Cain was a divine entity rejected by the Demiurge, Jesus was the second incarnation of Cain, and that the third incarnation of Cain, or second coming of Christ, will cleanse creation of the Demiurge's corruption. As with most forms of Cain worship, this would be persecuted by the Camarilla to keep kindred fear concentrated on the oldest vampire in the domain, and not the absent father figures of myths. Even the La Sombra vampires who helped found it simply latched onto Catholicism instead. The Cainite heresy never really died though, and with the waning influence of the Camarilla presented in 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, this faith has resurfaced as the Church of Cain, quickly garnering power as a popular-ish source for spiritual guidance among the damned. It's probably better than the local Setite, so it's not all bad, but the Church of Cain, like all vampire religions, can easily make way for cult behaviors backed up by supernatural powers of suggestion. Interestingly enough, the Cainite heresy was allegedly a real Gnostic sect. According to the #1 hater of everything Gnostic, Bishop Irenaeus of Leon, the Cainites were Gnostics who worshipped the biblical Cain, but there's no strong evidence to support that these people ever existed. Charnel Houses of Europe, the Shoah, is a sourcebook for Race to Oblivion, released in 1997, detailing the underworld's relationship with the Holocaust. Due to the nature of this book's subject matter, the writing was handled a little differently than usual, with only two main writers, Jonathan Black and Robert Hatch, and a foreword from the late Janet Berliner. While by its premise, this book sounds like it could very easily get ridiculous or that its own existence is downright offensive, this book primarily exists as an avenue to follow the big never forget lesson that we're supposed to learn from the Holocaust. In a careful balancing act, this book alternates quite clearly between moments of straight-up education on the Holocaust and sections on how the world of darkness was influenced by this atrocity. It's a very bleak read, even the parts that are more focused on the world of darkness, but it's about as honest as a work of supernatural fiction can be. In writing this, I was constantly concerned that I'm not doing this book justice, so I would recommend anybody interested in more details to find a PDF online, which is pretty easy, or watching Concentration Camp role-playing game by the Burger Krieg, which will be linked in the description. I mentioned that I would make up for not finding anything on the Vampire the Dark Ages video game, and here you go. With a publishing history spanning decades, not everything that was announced was able to receive publication. I will go over a comprehensive but somewhat incomplete list of notable cancelled media with a few caveats. I'm only talking about World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness related media. I will not talk about any media that was published after initially being cancelled. This mostly happened under Onyx Pass. I will also not talk about anything that I cannot find any information for beyond a mention in a catalog or newsletter. Lastly, I already went over the cancelled MMORPG by Crowd Control Productions and The Heart of Gaia in the last video, so I won't go over it again here. We're just about to cross the finish line, so to speak, so let's go quickly. Young Vampires in Love was meant to be an art book by Joshua Gabriel Timbrook. a long-time contributing illustrator for the World of Darkness. This book would have featured commentary and previously unseen artwork. However, while it was promoted on the White Wolf catalog from 1995 to 1996, it was never published. Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, Race to Oblivion, and Changeling the Dreaming were meant to get companion books for working their rules into the generic universal role-playing system, aka GURPS. This happened with Vampire the Masquerade in 1994, but all the other games I mentioned never got their announced companion books. In a 1996 interview for Inquest Gamer magazine, Mark Rein-Hagen talked about movies based on Werewolf the Apocalypse and Mage the Ascension. He mentioned the premise for the Werewolf movie being of a young Guru getting adopted by black spiral dancers and was in the process of filming, while the Mage movie was to be pitched to Miramax. Despite saying that a trailer for the Werewolf movie would be coming out the summer of that year, neither movie has seen the light of day. In 1999, a catalog mentions the character creator CD-ROM for Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Mage the Ascension. It was last mentioned in the 2001 catalog before never getting mentioned again. For Vampire the Masquerade cancelled media, we have The Camarilla, a sourcebook promoted in White Wolf magazine issue 26, which was published in 1991, and meant to give a detailed rundown on the Camarilla. I guess we got the guide to the Camarilla in 1999, so whatever. The Last Supper, a LARP-focused chronicle book promoted in the same White Wolf magazine issue. This definitely got reworked into 1995's Giovanni Chronicles. The Bruja Chronicles, Italy, and Hallowed Grounds. 3 different Dark Ages books that were meant to be released in 2004, however by then White Wolf had already moved on to its new World of Darkness. For Werewolf the Apocalypse cancelled media, we have Croton Song, a cancelled graphic novel promoted in the White Wolf catalog from 1995 to 1996, but never published. The comic would have focused on the battle between the Croatan tribe and the Force of the Worm on the real lost colony of Roanoke. Books 2 and 3 of the Saga of J. No Name. Book 1, Call to Arms, was published in 1996, but despite the sequels being fully written and edited, they would never be published. This will be the first of many World of Darkness novels cancelled in 1996 onwards due to the downturn of the book market. These books were basically about a young werewolf who gets caught up in mage schemes. Season of the Wolf, an isometric beat-em-up video game that was in development between 1995 and 1996. There is a bit of gameplay, but the game never actually came out. Worm Wars, a cancelled miniatures war game that was promoted by its production company Agents of Gaming in 1998, which would bring the battle against the worm to the tabletop. Some playtests were held at conventions, but given that Agents of Gaming went out of business in 2002, they likely shelved this project to patch up their sinking ship. Revised CD-ROM, a digital resource compiling the core rulebook, Storyteller's Guide, Storyteller's Companion, and Player's Guide for Werewolf the Apocalypse Revised Edition, which was promoted in a 2002 catalog. Vampire the Masquerade got this kind of CD-ROM digital resource, but it seems like Werewolf wasn't as lucky. For cancelled Mage the Ascension media, we have Through a Glass Darkly, a cancelled novel meant to be published in 1996 and promoted in the White Wolf catalog of that year. The story would have followed 3 mages, a priest, a queer clubgoer, and an intellectual, through 3 different time periods, while exploring faith, science, and mysticism. Standard mage stuff, really. Hosts of Heaven, a cancelled Sorcerer's Crusade sourcebook promoted in the 2001 catalog that would focus on faith-based magics and the societies around them. Lands of Mystery, Arabia, India, and Cathay, another cancelled Sorcerer's Crusade sourcebook promoted in the same catalog as Hosts of Heaven, which would give details for running chronicles in the Middle East and Asia. Untitled CD-ROM game, an Inquest Gamers magazine issue in 1998 mentioned that White Wolf was working with Hyperbole Studios to make a multiplayer computer game. On an unrelated note, I couldn't find anything about Hyperbole Studios after 1998. For cancelled Race to Oblivion media, we have Memento Mori, a cancelled book promoted in the 1995 catalog that would feature insights from the ferryman regarding transcendence. Hands of Fate. This is a bit convoluted, but in 1995, White Wolf put out a calendar with a cover art for a different book used for each different months. For December, The artwork was titled Hands of Fate, and thematically fits race more than any other game line. As all the other artworks, bar one, which was a teaser for Hunter the Reckoning, is captioned with its corresponding book, that's where the theory that this is referencing a cancelled book comes from. For Changeling the Dreaming cancelled media, we have the Book of Glamour, a cancelled source book wrote in a 2001 catalog which would talk all about glamour, treasures, and arts, including tools for creating your own arts. Keys to the Kingdom, a cancelled source book wrote in a 2002 catalog which would give details on little-known Fae domains, including Egypt and an unspecified rainforest. For a cancelled Hunter the Reckoning media, we have a motherfucking Uwe Boll movie. Announced in 2004 on White Wolf website, this was supposed to be based on the video game by High Voltage Studios, and would be directed by Uwe Boll, a man best known for making a ton of shitty movies, including a lot of infamously bad video game adaptations, being a complete jackass on the internet, and going into boxing matches against his critics. This movie was meant to come out in 2007, but production fizzled out before then as Uwe Boll was removed from the project. While 5th edition World of Darkness doesn't have any publicly known cancelled works, the Incognito Report sourcebook for 5th edition Hunter the Reckoning was delayed by over a year due to a change in direction. As this book focuses on moral panics, was originally supposed to come out in late 2024, and was centered around a figure heavily based on the QAnon conspiracy theory, which was losing relevancy at that time. I have a pretty strong guess as to why they changed direction. I guess it wasn't really cancelled as it did come out and I think it's fine, but there is significantly less focus on the COG conspiracy than initial marketing led me to believe, and now I really want to know what was the reason for the original direction this book was supposed to have before it changed. For cancelled Werewolf the Forsaken media, we have Heart of the Hunter, a cancelled novel promoted several times in 2005 that would have followed a mercenary ghost wolf in his misadventures. Mind-Size Theater The Forsaken, self-explanatory, which was mentioned in a 2004 and a 2006 issue of White Wolf's quarterly digital magazine, which I basically only just found out about. Mind-Size Theater for the Chronicles of Darkness was kind of troubled, and this game was the biggest casualty of that. So, that's not a complete list, but I think it's enough. So, we have reached the bottom of the World of Darkness iceberg. Probably. There might be darker depths still, but I'll leave that for you freaks to uncover. I really hope you've had fun with this exploration and learned something to derail your World of Darkness conversations with. I'll keep working on the next part of the 40k iceberg, spooky stories, and a few videos to just talk about shit I do or don't like. One of those recently came out and I was pretty happy with the results there. I'm also working on unofficial source books for 5th edition Hunter the Reckoning, and I'll throw something up from what I have so far. Commission money doesn't just fall from the sky, so I have to keep doing my own actual job to keep that project going. If it's not apparent, I have a lot to work on, so I should get on that. But before the Chula Riva show up at these depths, if you play 20th Anniversary Werewolf or Mage, please check out the source books I promoted in this video. An absolutely massive thank you for watching, and, well, may the night treat you right.